Will Brad Stevens ever figure out his lineups? Is the Celtics' current success a mirage? Is Isaiah Thomas as good as the other Isaiah Thomas? The only question left is, say it with me, you win. Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown Podcast. Today I'm pleased to bring on the show Larry Russell, who is the host of the podcast Celtics Beat and executive producer of CLNS Radio. Larry, thank you for coming on the show today. We're going to break down some Celtics, I imagine.
Thankfully, we are going to be breaking down the Celtics, I hope.
Well, it's a little bit rough because when we're recording this, they had just lost the opening of a 4-game road trip to the lowly Kings without DeMarcus Cousins. Is this something like an anomaly? Or are you worried?
You're going to be releasing this tomorrow. I think you can operate under the assumption they play Portland tonight, which I know Portland doesn't have the best record, but that's just not the best matchup for the Celtics, no matter how well or how poorly the Celtics are playing, because two good guards, Toronto, you can go right after Isaiah Thomas if you have a good backcourt. Portland, no matter as they have struggled this year, the Blazers aren't a good matchup. So if the Celtics end up winning today, it's like, oh my God, wow. So I don't know if you got a chance to listen to my show on Sunday. When I did my show Sunday, it was on the cusp of their game against the Clippers, which they ended up winning to push their winning streak to 7 games. So going into that game, they were on a 6-game winning streak. But as I said on the show, I was gearing up for this, Coach. I mean, I figured they had a regression to the means in them. They were not really playing overtly well in that 6-game winning streak. And if you look at their point differential, it still isn't that high. They were winning a lot of these games by just 2 or 3 possessions. So here you go. You go out west. It's the first West Coast road trip of the year. They shoot under 40%. They turn the ball over 18 times on the road, and they lost. And I want to say I'm worried over the team because I think I have a pretty rough idea of where the Celtics stand in the NBA this year. I know their weaknesses. I know their strengths. I know their stature in the landscape of the NBA. In the immediate, I think anyone, whether you have an emotional attachment to the Celtics or not, I think anyone can anticipate the Celtics just have a slight regression to the means in them. I just didn't think they were as good as they were playing during that 6-game winning streak. And whether they kind of take a dive like Toronto is taking right now, or I think they're in a little bit more than just a funk. I think they certainly have major issues. But I think if and when the Celtics do play like crap here, like every team can play over the course of an 82-game season, I also don't think that it'll be as bad as they look. Because, I don't know, I think they have more games like that in them against Sacramento. You just shoot under 40% and turn the ball over for 18 times, and you're not good enough defensively this year to really mitigate for something like that to happen.
Sure. Well, in that game against the Clippers, they won by 5, and they ended up taking 52 threes.
They made a ton of threes. They had home cooking.
Yeah. Now, by the way, they didn't make a great percentage.
Starting January 4th against Utah, there was just a stretch. They lost 2 games against New York and against Portland. As I referenced, in Portland, they were hitting their shots, but the rim was big. The rim was big for the month of January. They had a good they were fortunate to play some less than stellar teams at home. They had some scheduling wins, and they just got white hot from beyond the 3-point line, and that's where this whole regression to the means thing is in. And I actually just think that it could very well happen on this West Coast road trip, and I don't think it's going to be a huge issue if and when it does.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what sort of Brad Stevens understands is that they are undermanned to some degree. They're not as talented as some teams, and they're going to mitigate that by, if they turn the ball over a lot, you can overcome that by shooting a lot of threes. Or it's not even that you shoot well from 3. It seems to me that as long as you make more threes than the other team by X amount of threes, that will then give you a lot of leeway toward turnovers and rebounds.
That usually works. They have been taking pretty good care of the ball this year, although oddly enough, on the defensive side of the ball, they haven't been forcing turnovers like they have last year, which has actually been, not to just get off track and talk about the defense, because it is odd. When I just think about them defensively, I just say, it's really because Isaiah Thomas. I think that blueprint now is out with what Toronto has really done, and they just exploit it. And You see a lot Al Horford and Kelly Olynyk. They're constantly monitoring Isaiah Thomas's guy, and you just get the sense or the feeling that they're just giving up a little more shots too close to the rim because of that. Al Horford's a little slower than he has, but if you look at the numbers, they're almost identical in terms of the shots that are taken around the rim last year by the opponents and the field goal percentage of the opponents in and around the basket. Actually, defensively, it just goes back to turnovers. They are forcing a few less turnovers, and even rebounds is second chance points by the opposition is still in and around of where they were last year. They are worse last year, but really defensively, it is just that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, they didn't make shots last night against Sacramento, and we'll see what happens tonight against Portland. Although I wouldn't. I don't have a good feeling about that one. Let's see. You're releasing this show tomorrow. I am legitimately operating under the assumption that I don't even know what I should just. You can go ahead, Doc. I want to check the point spread for tonight's game against Portland.
Yeah, check it out because, well, I don't know if you saw the Dallas Mavericks, Portland Blazers at the end of the game the other night, but we were on top of that, mining or tweeting video, and I did a breakdown on it because there was 9 lead changes in the last 2 minutes, and it literally was it looked like a Drew League summer league game, back and forth. Dirk hitting threes, C.J. McCollum going off, and so that's what you got to be worried about. And the interesting thing about what the Blazers were doing was they went right to C.J. McCollum the whole time, not Damian Lillard. And that's your guy. That has prompted some interesting discussion about maybe who's better now, C.J. or Lillard.
Tonight, it'll probably be whoever they can get Isaiah Thomas on, whether they go right at Isaiah Thomas's guy, whether they do some small pick and rolls to get an advantage of Isaiah Thomas. By the way, did check the point spread. Portland, despite being, they're actually playing a little better, 5-5 in the last 10, despite being 23-30, are actually favored at home against the second in the conference, 33-19, coming into Thursday night's game against the Boston Celtics. There you go. Yeah. That's telling. That is telling.
We shall see. Portland usually does it. They welcome the East Coast team, and they come out on fire. I mean, it seems to always happen, even going back years, and the crowd gets into it. So that's going to be a tough one, but perhaps they've now been woken up having lost the game against the Kings without Boogie, which is, a really interesting thing. And I think that also goes to that point we've heard about in the past, like the Ewing theory, right, where when your star goes out or maybe even leaves the team just plays better for some weird reason.
Yeah, in the immediate that usually that has a tendency to happen. It sort of, whatever it is, it just sort of galvanizes a team. Although to the Celtics' advantage, as I referenced, they ran into the Raptors without DeMar DeRozan. Although it doesn't seem if DeMar DeRozan plays or not, the Raptors can't seem to win a game as is, anyways. And then of course they played the Clippers without Chris Paul on Super Bowl Sunday, a game that I don't think anybody watched outside of diehard Celtics fans in Boston to see Paul Pierce's return, because there was another sporting event later that night that was going to take about 6 hours of people's time. I know you watched it eventually on replay.
I will admit, even though I'm completely against the NFL and think it'll be extinct in 20 years, I did end up going to a party. I did end up watching football. I watched the end. I mean, I kind of had one eye on it while I was schmoozing, but then I did see the end, and it certainly was probably the most dramatic Super Bowl we've ever seen ever, right?
World Series. Well, they've actually been saying that about the NFL. I mean, I've been tend to really get off course here and off track here, but when I was growing up, the Super Bowls used to be, I'm sounding old. That's what happens when you turn 30, Coach. But when I was growing up, the Super Bowls were like Bills, Cowboys, and 49ers, Chargers, and they were a joke. The Super Bowl was the NFC Championship game. But then for the last 15 years, all of a sudden, every single time we ask, it's is this the best Super Bowl ever? I mean, the Patriots beat the Rams. Is it the best Super Bowl ever? Or Elway beats Brett Favre. Is that the best Super Bowl ever? So Malcolm Butler's interception at the 1, is that the best Super Bowl ever? I haven't had enough time. I'm just content with the outcome. I didn't have enough time to really dive in if that were not the best Super Bowl ever, because I've been thinking too much about the Celtics and thinking about too much about my appearance with you.
Right.
Make sure.
That's good. Then you don't have to think about how often the Patriots cheat, right? Oh, anyhow.
Not cheating, you're not trying.
That's right. So anyway, by the way, I'm speaking out of my butt. I have no idea what all that stuff. Aside from the Deflategate, I don't know anything else about video and whatever they talked about. But
and justify them. Love to dig out my Machiavelli book right there in my bookshelf.
Okay,
but the ends justify the means.
That is a good book to have. Well, the one thing I wanted to.
Auerbach did it. Cold showers, fire alarms,
the heat, slick floors,
anything.
That's true. All right. Well, listen, it's a tradition. Let me ask you about this.
Like the other.
So, the Celtics have won, they won a bunch of games in a row until last night. And, they haven't had Avery Bradley with them for 14 games. And I'm wondering what that means because as far as I'm concerned, Bradley is like completely and utterly vital to any chance they have. And yet, of those 14 games, they only lost 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, 5 of them.
Well, hold on. I don't know who we can credit this to. Well, just, I guess, say credit to Brad Stevens. Now, you can say, well, they've only lost 4 games without Avery Bradley. You do, major disclaimer, look at the January schedule. It was cupcake. They were at home all the time. They credited the Celtics. They won those games. But they had a very, very generous schedule in January. They did have some issues against the Knicks, against the Blazers. We'll see what happens against. Watch the Celtics win by 30 against the Blazers tonight. We're going to just look like complete jackasses. But they lost to the Knicks and they lost to the Blazers, and Avery Bradley would have made a huge difference in those games because it was Rose who killed them again. Rose killed them on Christmas Day as well. That has been a trend for the Celtics this year, is guard play against the Celtics, and 2 good guards against the Celtics has really been more of an issue than other teams, say big men. You would think the Celtics would have trouble against teams with really good big men. They have gotten killed in the glass in these games, but it's really been the guard play. If you have a couple guards that are really just going off against Celtics, that's what's really been hurting them. But with Bradley or any of these injuries that the Celtics have, and going back to what I was just about ready to say before I started rambling on, is Brad Stevens. So Marcus Smart missed some time, a few times last year. Jay Crowder, there was a long stretch, not long, I don't know, it was about 2 weeks, I think. And then, of course, now Bradley has been out a couple weeks, and it looks like he's going to miss a lot of time, and as he should. And you cannot mess with Achilles injuries at all, even as I know. But with Brad Stevens or whatever the Celtics do, they handle injuries pretty well. And there is sometimes a little bit of an acclimation process. I go back to when they first lost Marcus Smart last year. I remember they went down to Atlanta one night, and they just got smashed by 30 points on TNT. And they were able to weather the storm. Jay Crowder, I remember they went an offer for the week. They ended up losing to Toronto, Indiana, and Cleveland, all in pretty uncompetitive games. And Paul George, DeMar DeRozan, and Kevin Durant scored 30-plus against Jay Crowder-less Celtics teams. But then the Celtics ended up kind of weathering the storm without Crowder, and they ended up really reestablishing themselves. They won a game at Golden State April 1st. A lot of people remember that at the end of the 54-game winning streak. And now Bradley, they got off to they were looking a little sketchy there in the middle of January without Avery Bradley, but they've been pretty good at getting acclimated without even Al Horford, actually, when they were missing Horford sometimes earlier this year. The one instance where they didn't handle an injury too well was Isaiah Thomas, but I don't think he really missed I think he missed like five or 6 games, although he actually missed a few games, I think, back in 2015. They handled that pretty well. But the Celtics have always been able to handle injuries pretty well. But going back to your point, with Bradley saying that they've only lost a few games, I actually think this might be a little bit of a too small of a sample, even though he's missed a couple weeks now, just because of the level of competition that the Celtics have played. I'm interested to see how they'll be able to handle with no Avery Bradley tonight against Portland, with the 2 very good guards in the backcourt going against the Celtics. With Jaylen Brown starting now, which I haven't even referenced at all. He's done, okay, but we'll see tonight. And even just going forward as they get closer to the All-Star break, because they're not playing the best teams. It's just the scheduling issue. You're not going to be able to play your best basketball when you're, playing back-to-back, and you're going to a different time zone in Dallas, and then you're coming back here. I think middle of February they have something where they play Philadelphia and Chicago on a back-to-back with just only a day between a long West Coast road trip. So you have a scheduling issue where you're just not going to be able to bring your best effort every single night. So I would still say that the book has yet to be written on the Celtics in terms of how they'll look without Avery Bradley.
Fair enough. Well, I fired up the on-off numbers, curious to see what it's like and his impact on the court has been all year long. And I'm kind of shocked that he is actually
the defensive rating, right?
A negative net rating, like barely, a negative 0.1. But that's a far cry from guys like Jay Crowder, who are a plus 8.4 when they're out there. Amir Johnson is plus 6. Marcus Smart is plus 4.9. Al Horford 4.7. So that is very strange to me. Even Isaiah Thomas now is crept up.
That's Isaiah.
But Isaiah is plus 3.4 now. He's crept up. I don't think it was that high earlier. So, I'm kind of curious what that means, because he's their best defender by far. and he's proven himself to be a good perimeter shooter and a scorer now. So I'm kind of. Do you have any? Why is that happening?
I was ready to say this is where I needed you, because the whole thing with the Celtics lineups this year has actually been something in which I'm not going to lie. It's just you just sort of it leads you to overanalyzing. There's plenty of just goofy lineups, and I don't know if it just goes back to Brad Stevens. He's still experimenting with lineups here on was it February 9th? I don't even know what the day. It's February 9th. He's still experimenting with the lineups on February 9th. Last night against the Kings, beginning of the fourth quarter, key point of the game, the Kings were up by 3. They ended up pushing it to 9. Then the Celtics ended up cutting it back to 6. But key point of the game, I thought, was when the Kings really started to take the lead, and they ended up just blowing Boston out at the end of the game. But he plays a lineup that he hasn't played together all year. He plays a 5-man unit. He hasn't played together all year. And it seems like he's doing that almost every other night. And even at the end of games, while he won't trot out a brand new 5-man unit at the end of a game, he's constantly lineup experimenting. So in terms of just who works with what lineup, that is still the one mystery of the 2017 Celtics this campaign.
Yeah, and you can see it when you look at even the last 7 games in the streak, and you're looking at the 5-man lineups. He's not playing any of these lineups more than 5 minutes at a game.
Yeah, and he did it last year too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The
starters got 10 minutes
until. Okay, but he was lineup experimenting until I want to say after the whole David Lee situation worked its way out, he settled down. But I'm surprised he's still tinkering and still in the laboratory on middle of February here.
Yeah, so the most of the last 7 games, so the 6-game streak and then the last night, Jaylen Brown has been playing a lot with Jay Crowder, Al Horford, Amir Johnson, Isaiah Thomas. And that's a negative 1.1. But again, that's not. It's 10 minutes a game. When typically, when the most played lineup you're going to see in most of the NBA is at least 12, 14 minutes a game at least. And so it's a really kind of, you can tell that's a good indication there that he's still, you're right, you never want to get into past the All-Star break and still trying to figure out who to play with whom. But I suppose it's possible that, we just have to have hope. And eventually, once he gets it going and settled, you're going to see, a much more efficient and better Celtics team, I suppose.
And not to just sort of go a little off topic here, if you ask anyone in and around this city or in and around that follows the team, they would say that Brad Stevens has handled Jaylen Brown pretty well, and just in terms of how he's bringing him along. So I don't know what if there's anything behind with maybe some front office influence in that. I mean, it's not about, I guess, every last tenth of a point as in every single game as some observers may want to be. But I just threw completely that out, something like that out there. Yeah,
I mean, to give you an example, the Wizards, the top 5, the lineup that they run the most gets 20 minutes a game together. They play 905 minutes for over 45 games. In the Celtics, the most played lineup that appears when I'm looking at the top lineups is 12 minutes.
That's been, I think, one of the primary storylines of the season. And something that I don't think anybody has an answer for, except for people who have direct connections to the organization or are in the organization.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, when you're coaching,
it's very interesting,
and you measure, you master the X's and O's, and you know how to communicate. Those are all the things that are learnable. But eventually, there's no real clear-cut method to deciding which guys to play with whom. Right? You get to study the numbers, and eventually it kind of bears itself out, or maybe you get a gut feeling about it too. But that's got to be the single most difficult decision that these coaches have to make for the most part. And I would imagine that some of these guys would even say, I would play better if we could kind of get more chemistry going on the court together. And there's no question that they must be looking at this. I mean, when I did the breakdown with Olynyk and saying that Olynyk should be playing more with Horford, it was bizarre because right after that they started doing it, and it started working.
It was very interesting too, because I also noticed you made some suggestions to Golden State about running some offensive sets, and then I believe the very next night they did that right at the beginning of the game. It was very bizarre, wasn't it?
That is bizarre, I suppose, and excitingly bizarre.
To be fair, also with Olynyk, he was coming back from a shoulder injury, and he was being slowly worked back in. And then Tyler Zeller also went out with a sickness and was out for 3 weeks.
But that's okay. The less Zeller plays, the better, right?
Yeah, although he's I don't want to say he's played well. He's played just with a little more intensity than he was doing in November and December.
Well, that's what's so funny, because when I watched him in the beginning of the year, he was so bad.
Right.
And I'm like, what happened to the guy that was so good in college and had all these skills?
And even I don't know. It's something I don't really lose. Well, I'm sure there are some really ultra diehard Celtics fans who do lose sleep over. But he was not just very good in college, very solid player for North Carolina. He had a great. I don't know if you noticed this, but I don't want to call it a great season, but I mean there was talk. It was good enough to warrant talk of him possibly getting an extension worth in and around $10 million per year based on the season that he had in 2015 when he was a good offensive player, good mid-range game, and was not the best rim protector in the NBA, but he was in and around the top 10. He was one of the best post defenders in the NBA, which I guess now has even less value than it did 2 years ago, if that's possible or not. I mean but he's someone who has fallen off the map and is really sometimes you don't even know if he's on the team anymore.
Well, let's talk a little bit about another subject that I noticed on ESPN that came up, and I think it's a subject both near and dear to both of our hearts. The Isaiah Thomas versus Isaiah Thomas. They spell it differently, so maybe I can pronounce it Isaiah versus Isaiah. I don't know. But the original Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah, there you go. That's the easier one.
And I remember when I first did when Isaiah first popped up on my radar, and I did the first big viral video we ever had was Isaiah versus KYRIE after their rookie years, and I actually had to put Kings guard Isaiah Thomas because nobody knew who I would be talking about otherwise. However, it's changed since then. And how legitimate do you think that argument really is?
Well, here's the thing. First off, I know the analytics community now has all of a sudden been, not just with the Celtics Isaiah Thomas, is actually there's been a little, they'd say that he's slightly overrated from what he was in the 80s. I'm actually, you would think as a quote-unquote Celtics guy, I wouldn't like Isaiah Thomas, dirty guy. I'm actually very prejudiced to that Isaiah Thomas. I'm 30 years old. I grew up on NBA Jam for Super Nintendo in the early 90s, and I used the Pistons, and I took that Isaiah Thomas and just sent him to the corner on every single possession to gun up three. I mean, he was
on fire.
He was my man for that game. He was the guy. The arcade version, I actually used the Celtics, Reggie Lewis and Kevin McHale. Anyways,
wow.
So this Isaiah Thomas, this is going to be like a tongue twister in its own right. The Celtics Isaiah Thomas, ESPN's Real Plus Minus has him actually sort of what I think like the 14th, 15th, something like anywhere between 14 to 17 in the NBA. And Marcus Smart is, I think, right behind him because this Isaiah Thomas is the numbers say it. There's real. I think he's dead last. He is dead last in the NBA in defensive Real Plus Minus. The numbers say it. And then of course, when you watch it, I mean, the numbers don't lie. In this case, he really is that bad defensively, but offensively, he's, for me, and I just did a documentary, which I know you know about it because you narrated it, called Paul Pierce, the best pure scorer in Celtics history. This season, Isaiah Thomas is having, if we can just, for 1 second, just block out Isaiah Thomas on the defensive side of the floor. This year, the season Isaiah Thomas is having is the best season offensive season I've ever seen for a Celtic, not just in terms of what he's doing, in terms of the numbers and everything like that. He just has all the shots in the most. He's the best shooter. He's a better shooter than Ray Allen when he was here. I am saying that, honest to God. He has all the shots, everything. There's, I said this to Bob Ryan in that just Isaiah Thomas off those dribble handoffs without Horford or even if he's trying to get to the basket, as of now with how fast he is, if I need to once again reference Super Nintendo, he is like playing Troy Aikman football, and if you have one of those really ultra fast running backs that are too fast for everybody else, you just give them a pitch and they just run around, and once they get the corner, that's it. Isaiah is like that in that he is just one step faster than seemingly everyone else that's guarding him, so he has no issue getting the basket, and with that alone, with his own speed, he's got the hesitation move, the shot that he had against the Atlanta. He has all the shots. He has, and he's efficient enough to make all the shots. Offensively, he's as good of a Celtic as I've ever seen. In terms of where we just put him against Isaiah Thomas from the Pistons. Like I said, I can't, I'm a little biased and prejudiced with him, but he's still, I wouldn't go there yet because I'm just not sure in terms of Isaiah's career. The question with this Isaiah Thomas is how good is he going to be really in the next 3 to 4 years? I think this is his absolute peak. And with his size, if he loses a little bit of speed, and his so much of his game is predicated on the fact that he's just so much faster than everybody else, I wonder how, I don't want to say how effective he will be because he's still just such a phenomenal shooter. But I wonder how that is going to translate for his game, how that's going to translate for him when he is even 29 and it's still very young to sound like me or you or whatever. How that still will translate to him at that point of his career or even beyond.
Sure. Well, let's just talk a little bit about let's throw out defense for right now because defense, schmefense.
Yeah,
we want to
right,
talk
yeah.
about. Let's talk about offense. And so the reason why this is an interesting conversation is that there's no question that the original Isaiah Thomas gets crapped on. They look at certain very basic metrics and they have no idea without watching how good he was back then, what that means. And so I certainly growing up in Chicago hated, he's a Chicago guard and so am I, so I should have this, a connection to him. But
and all the rules, but not to interrupt you, but all the rules that were, right now guards in the NBA, it's almost like wide receivers in the NFL, just different rules. The defense and everything in terms of the actual freedom that defenses had back when Isaiah Thomas was playing. They changed the rules back then, well, specifically for Michael Jordan, but Isaiah Thomas played on the rules for guards back then are just completely different to what they are now. So I want to say I don't say you cannot compare this era and that era in that regards offense, but it's almost like I don't think it's as significant. Now I'm going to be bringing up such an extreme example, but I'm just using it as an example. It's almost like the dead ball era in baseball, or not pitching from a pitching mound in baseball in terms of what the defenses were able to do back then in terms of with these guards. It is far more of an open game for guards in the NBA now than it was 30 years ago.
For sure. Now, because there was also the fear of driving to the basket was real back then.
Yeah, you get your
hand checking. I don't think people understand. I should do a video on this where
it's huge.
2 fingers on a guy's hip, you could control the guy.
And you moved him around.
Yeah,
that was all the defensive players back then. That's what they would do. You could push them in any direction you wanted to.
Right. Now that said, that's another reason why the spin move was actually very very useful back then, and we don't really see it as much now because of that. Another good video that could be done. But here's the thing about Isaiah. So they go look at his 3-point percentage. Oh, he was a terrible shooter because he didn't shoot threes well. Well, I gotta tell you, nobody
70% with him in NBA Jam.
Right. But here's the thing. Being in Chicago Stadium and that ball got swung to him and he shot it, there was a collective groan across the entire stadium because that ball was going in. He was lights out, knockdown shooter. Now, it was mostly from probably 2022 because they didn't really shoot threes like that. And whenever he would have shot them, it would have been at the end of the quarter, with no time left or, just tossing it up from deep in the backcourt. So it's a really unfair way to look at how he shot because I can guarantee you that guy kept coaches up at night with the way he could destroy you from the outside. But then he had Steph Curry's game going to the basket. He was a lot like Steph Curry is a lot like him, and I've actually argued this. Had they opened the game up and let him shoot threes like they do now, then he would have been Curry before Curry.
I hate to sound like a simpleton, but he was a 2-time champion at a pretty competitive time for the NBA.
Yeah. That's a good
answer. That is a simpleton argument, but I think it does speak for itself and its own. Draw your own conclusions after that.
Sure. So if you want to compare the new Isaiah to that, certainly, he's
offensively. I'm going to drop you. Although offensively, I am pretty biased to this Isaiah. I think, like I said, he right now this single season, not just like I said, the whole statistics and how efficient he is. Offensively, I have not seen a better Celtic.
Okay.
Offense, or in terms of, or at least scoring. Now that goes back to me. My first year following the team was '91, which. Actually, the Celtics lost to the Pistons in the playoffs that year. Largely, actually, Isaiah was hurt. He had a wrist injury, but he ended up coming back. I think one of the key plays in that series was a pick and roll that Isaiah and Bill Laimbeer won, and pick and pop, and Isaiah and Bill Laimbeer hit a shot from the top of the key at the guard. Anyway, by the way, is there? I make this joke all the time. I say I became a Celtics fan in '91. That's just isn't that like buying stock in AOL in 1997? in terms of like what happened after that. But go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause AOL, maybe more like CompuServe or something, but yes.
Blockbuster.
Blockbuster. Yeah, I mean, it's rough, but hey, who knows when you fall in love? It's a strange bit of chemistry there. But the point being that, this Isaiah Thomas, if you look at the fourth quarter numbers that people are making a big deal of, I should probably do a comparison between him and Russ, because, right now he's scoring 10.6 points a game in the fourth, shooting 49% from the field and 41 from three. And I think what's even more impressive with that is that he's actually kept up his assists from as well. He doesn't get that many.
Decision making is great.
He doesn't go down that
low. Decision making is incredible. That's also one thing. Go ahead. I'm very good at interrupting.
Hey, listen,
all
you're
the
my
time.
guest.
What are you, the guest? The host of the show,
right? And so, but the point being that everybody knows it's going to go to him. Their offense doesn't get very clever in the fourth quarter down the stretch. It literally will be handed to him and either set him a screen or just spread and give him room. And that's actually probably what's the most impressive about this, is that night after night after night, he continues to do this, even though teams know that he's going to do it, and even though he's so much shorter than everybody else. It's still that's what's astounding this year.
But that is where actually, and this is that sort of goes back to what I was even saying at the beginning and what I said on last week's Celtics Beat, was that's why I think that there could be a regression to the means in them, right? It's just sort of just the fact that they keep winning all these close games. And you brought up a very good point about their offense being more and more predictable now. And I think one of the reasons as to why, and I made a note to bring this up on Celtics Beat this Sunday, is I love Al Horford, and I actually still love what he's doing for the team offensively, but he's even becoming a little less versatile than what he was even in November. I can't believe how maybe I'm wrong. I actually have not looked at the statistics on this. You can maybe look at their points per possession, but it seems like he has almost no low post or offense out of the low block anymore. Any post offense. Beginning of the year, they were able to dump the ball out. There was a game in which Isaiah Thomas did not play against the Orlando Magic, and the Celtics killed them, and it was all based on really Horford. They get the ball to Horford in a low block. He could draw a double team, and he could find someone cutting. He could pass the ball to the open guy. He could pass the ball to the guy who passes it to the open guy himself, and they were able to get a ton of offense out of that. I'm interested to see where the Celtics go now. They've lost that dimension because I don't know what it is. All of a sudden, Horford can't do that out of the low block anymore, and I think now this is a little more of a funk, and teams aren't doubling Horford in the low post like they were, and if they're not doubling him, then he's less effective as a passer. So that actually, as I just said, I think that goes a little back to the regression of the means. There was a game, you mentioned Russ. There was a game, Isaiah and Russ were having this huge shootout in the fourth quarter, and it was at the end of December. I know I remember because I talked about this game with you, and Isaiah kicked the ball a few times in the fourth quarter, and that's just going to happen. The ball's just going to bounce sometimes the wrong way, and you keep playing these close games. Right now, the Celtics have been very fortunate in some of these, and there are, I think, going to be instances where, God forbid, the ball doesn't bounce the wrong way, and then all of a sudden, here come the talking heads, here come the hot takes. Is Isaiah Thomas not that clutch, but et cetera, et cetera. So I just think the ball may bounce a few bad ways, and just in that you referenced of what Isaiah's been doing in the fourth quarter, because it's something that hasn't been done by the greatest players in the history of the league, and as much as I love Isaiah Thomas, if they can't do that, I guess sometimes they can't too.
Fair enough. Now, a quick look at the post-ups by Al Horford, and he's averaging four a game. And looking at the last several games, it hasn't shrunk. It looks like he's been getting at least that many, but he's only average at it in a way that's not as much
okay, there it is. And I haven't looked at one number there. It's just something that has just jumped out. And like I said, at the beginning of the year, that was a good chunk of the Celtics offense, it seemed like, was what they were able to do with Horford. I'm going to say they ran the offense through him like Shaq in 2001 or something like that. But that was something that they could utilize. And, yeah, like I said, teams just aren't doubling him anymore because it seems like they really don't have to. And there's not been one game at me that sort of jumped out of my head like, wow, get the ball to Al Horford down low. He's just not being able to. Teams aren't doubling him anymore. If you're not doubling him, like I said, you can't do the Hakeem Olajuwon or Dwight Howard 2009 where he's kicking it, finding a cutter, like I said, passing it to the guy who passes it to get a hockey assist. I mean, everything. That's something that I don't want to. It's a slight concern for me because I actually enjoyed. I thought it was good basketball. of course, it helps the Celtics.
Right. Well, you've been talking about Isaiah being the best scorer that you've seen in the Celtics, and that kind of
For this year.
When?
For this year, if you want to compare single seasons, I don't know if you maybe compare, say, like maybe. Well, for me, it goes back to 1991. If you want to say, I guess, Larry Bird's 1988 season, which is like that incredible weird season where he had 29.9 points per game, and I think he averaged almost 8 rebounds and 7 assists or something like that.
Okay.
But
you're also ignoring
this is the best I've seen, and that's including the height of Pierce's career.
Okay, so let's talk about the height of Pierce, because I had the honor of doing the voiceover for your terrific documentary.
I had the honor of just dictating and orders. And hurry up, give me that file. Thank you.
Everybody should go watch it. It's over on CLNS Radio's YouTube channel, and it's called. Give us the title of the video.
Paul Pierce, the best pure scorer in Boston Celtics history. That title was effectively made by Bob Ryan, who gave Pierce that title back in 2003 after Game 1 of a 2003 playoff series against the Indiana Pacers. He put that in the Boston Globe the next day, in which Pierce scored 41 points, and he went, I think, 20 for 20 from the free throw line. Pierce played great in that series. They had an upset over the Pacers in the playoffs back in the 03. But so that is something that's built off of what Bob Ryan has said about Pierce in terms of being the best pure scorer. That, of course, initiated a huge debate in Boston. Well, Larry Bird accepting Pierce, but Ryan said no, it's Pierce.
Sure. Well, I had been in the wilderness in the NBA.
It's a documentary.
Right, for a little while. And so I didn't get a chance to see a lot of that early Pierce stuff. And, his body isn't cut. He doesn't look like a great athlete. And what I remember from him with the Celtics in 2010 and 2007, after they got the big three together, what you forget is that how explosive he was. I mean, there are highlights in your video where you see him go to the basket and dunking on guys. And that is a thing that I think is largely forgotten, and maybe because he's kind of strung the career out a little bit too long here, and we've forgotten.
You know who was also like that as well was Ray Allen. Watch some Ray Allen highlights from the late 90s. You think of Ray Allen, just this Reggie Miller dude coming off screen. Watch Ray Allen. Anyways, so if you think of Paul Pierce in 2010, one thing about Pierce, and I make this joke all the time, we always have these images of Pierce, the clutch guy, hitting the shots. 2008, 2010, game-winning shots against the Miami Heat in the playoffs. He was far less of course, he was 30-plus in those years. But at the beginning of his career, he was, of course, very explosive. And he could get to the basket seemingly at will. I remember there was an article in Sports Illustrated talking about how good he was at getting to the basket. He was number 1 in the NBA in getting to the free throw line. Number 1, he was top 3-ish. I know Iverson was up there too, but around 01, 02. Top guy with the top 3 guys at getting to the free throw line. And he was so good at the end of games because he not only had his step back, his pull up, but he was able to get to the basket at will. I remember right off the top of my head, he had a game winner down in Miami, which completely turned the 2002 season around. That Celtics team ended up going to the Eastern Conference Finals. Game against Miami, game against Golden State, got to the basket at will at the end of games. In 2008-ish to 12, he couldn't really do that. I'm going to say he couldn't do it at all. I mean, you're going to be able to find clips of him being able to get to the basket. But at the end of games, he struggled in terms of being able to get to the basket. And this is sort of one thing. Doc Rivers, for as good of a coach as he was in terms of after timeouts, and I'm sure the numbers probably show him actually being, he didn't call up any plays for the Celtics. At the end of the game, it was just give it to Pierce, and Pierce really couldn't get to the basket like he could. And so what would usually happen, you would think of him hitting that Miami winner against Miami in the 2010 playoffs. What would usually happen was double team comes, Pierce kicks it off his foot, Eddie House or someone retrieves the ball and just tucks up a wild shot. So it's actually at the latter points of his career, you're right. Yes, he now, of course, for most people past 30s, they're a little slower. He was definitely far less explosive than what he was, state of the obvious, in his early 20s.
Yeah, and so I was pleasantly reminded of just how dominant he was, and there's enough teams in there that were bad enough where it just wasn't getting a lot of exposure from across the rest of the country. So I think it was a little bit of an obscurity that he was toiling in, unfortunately. But you can put up his highlights against Bird and McHale, JoJo White's not a good example, but what I'm thinking of is
I think his number one comparison. Bob Ryan told me this. Basketball Reference could be wrong. I'm going to blame Bob Ryan if I am wrong, but his closest comparison, Havlicek.
Oh, yeah. No, I can
think
see
it
that.
is.
I mean, it's different. Havlicek was never as aggressive, I don't think, on offense.
No.
as
I mean,
Pierce
just
was.
in terms of the numbers of his career. When they have that little
Right, the player
scores,
comparison.
yes, it's Havlicek.
Yeah. And by the way, Havlicek, I mean, I think people could argue he was as good as Bird. I mean, I watched those games. Nobody could have played that position that he played better than he did. Like, there were moments where he was just perfect on both sides of the floor, every decision. That doesn't mean he's scoring every time, but just the way he played the game was perfect. And then I'm also thinking about Tiny. Even Tiny, who was a scorer.
You're a tiny guy. Tiny like Pierce was on some bad Celtics teams.
Yeah, and he was a scorer, and he certainly is an assist man as well. I mean, he was kind of like the Russell Westbrook of his era to some degree, I'd imagine, in terms of his stats. And so, but there are a lot of really good scorers, in the Celtics history. So, I guess without question, Pierce has to be.
Never had a guy who's led the league in scoring. That's the ultimate trivia question.
Oh, wow.
Which Celtics player led the league in scoring in a single season? The answer is no one. Isn't that incredible?
That is amazing. Although I have to imagine there's got to be a bunch of teams that have that distinction as well, right?
Yeah, but it's the Boston Celtics.
Okay.
It isn't the freaking Charlotte Hornets or whatever.
Fair enough. Well, this was great, Larry. I'm glad you could come on.
It was unbelievable. Thank you so much.
Break some, this is some real Celtic stuff that we were talking about from, the real dirt here. So I'm glad you can come on and share it with us. And, let us know, how do we keep track of you and all your stuff so we can keep following you?
Google me, I guess, right? That's the one thing, I say this all the time, is of as much fault as society has, we seem to be very good at finding things on the internet. I am on the internet, I guess, I don't know, Twitter at @CLNS_LHR. But most people, of course, know, if they do know me, it is, of course, the show Celtics Beat.
Yes. The big, every Sunday, when you want your taste of Celtics, get on to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever and check out Celtics
And with
Beat.
you on the CNS mobile app, right? It's about the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back.
That's right. We're all part of the CLNS family right now, so glad to be part of it. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You win?
Yes.
You win, Larry?
I just said I answered before you even answered back at me. That was a yes. We. I don't know. I know French and English. Yes.
Awesome.